An overwhelmed mother of twins dozed off on the shoulder of a generous stranger at a noisy train station, but what he did next left witnesses deeply moved. It was the kind of kindness that stays with you forever. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Chicago, June 2008. The afternoon sun slanted through the small bathroom window, casting a golden rectangle across the white tile floor. Sarah Williams stared down at the plastic stick in her trembling hands, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. 2 pink lines. Unmistakable. Positive. She sank down onto the closed toilet lid, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. At 26, pregnancy wasn't something she'd planned. Not yet, anyway, but as her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, a small smile tugged at her lips. A baby. Her baby. Their baby. The memory of a dinner conversation from 3 months earlier flashed through her mind. Richard, immaculate in his tailored suit, swirling an expensive Cabernet in a crystal glass across the white tablecloth. "Children?" he'd said, his aristocratic features pulled into a slight frown. "They're definitely not in my 5-year plan, Sarah. The Blackwood Enterprises expansion into the Asian market is my priority, perhaps after that." He'd reached across the table to pat her hand indulgently, like one might reassure a child. "Besides, you still have your studies to finish." The memory dimmed her smile. Would Richard be happy about this unexpected development? They'd been together for 3 years. Surely that was enough time to adjust any 5-year plan. She checked her watch. Richard wouldn't be home for hours. As the heir to Blackwood Enterprises, one of Chicago's largest real estate development companies, his days were filled with meetings, calls, and networking events that regularly stretched into the evening. Sarah tucked the pregnancy test into her pocket and left the bathroom. She had a double shift ahead of her. Classes at Chicago Community College in the morning, where she was finishing her business administration degree, and then 8 hours at Martino's, the upscale Italian restaurant where she served tables to chip away at her mountain of student loans. "I'll tell him tonight," she whispered to herself, picking up her worn backpack. "We'll figure this out together." 12 hours later, Sarah dragged herself up the elevator to the luxury apartment that Richard paid for, out of generosity, as he often reminded her. Her feet ached from hours of carrying heavy trays, and her lower back throbbed dully. Was that normal this early in pregnancy? She made a mental note to look it up later. The apartment was dark when she unlocked the door. Strange. Richard had texted earlier saying he'd be home for dinner. She flipped on the lights, revealing the immaculate living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The place always felt more like a showroom than a home, with its minimalist furniture and strategic art pieces that Richard's decorator had selected. "Richard?" she called out, dropping her keys in the small ceramic bowl by the door. Only silence answered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably Richard saying he'd be late again. Instead, she saw a notification from her banking app. Curious, she opened it, then felt her stomach drop as if she were in a plummeting elevator. Joint checking account. Balance $0. 000. Joint savings account. Balance $0. 000. Sarah's hands began to shake. This had to be a mistake. Just this morning, there had been nearly $4,000 in those accounts, her tips from the past 2 months carefully saved. She quickly logged into the account details and saw the transaction. Transfer to account ending in 4721 now. Richard's personal account. The sound of a key in the lock made her whirl around. The door opened and Richard Blackwood stepped in, impeccable as always in a charcoal Armani suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Sarah's rent before she moved in with him. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, but his blue eyes were cold in a way she had never seen before. "Richard, what's going on? The accounts—" "We need to talk," he interrupted, not meeting her eyes as he set his leather briefcase on the console table. His voice had the same detached tone he used when firing employees. "This isn't working." Sarah stood frozen, the pregnancy test suddenly heavy in her pocket. "What isn't working?" she asked, though a terrible realization was already dawning. Richard loosened his silk tie, finally looking at her with an expression of practiced patience. "Us, Sarah. This relationship. It's run its course." "Richard, Her voice faltered as she pulled the pregnancy test from her pocket with shaking fingers. "I need to tell you something." His ice-blue eyes fixed on the plastic stick in her hand, and Sarah watched his expression shift. Not to surprise, as she'd expected, but to something worse. Disgust, quickly masked by cold calculation. "That doesn't change anything," he said flatly, maintaining a careful distance. "In fact, it only confirms we need to end this now." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Richard sighed, as if explaining something tedious to someone particularly slow. "You're a waitress from Omaha, Sarah. You'll never fit into my world. My family expects a strategic marriage, not a distraction." "A distraction?" Sarah repeated, tears welling in her eyes. "Is that what I've been to you for 3 years? A distraction? Let's not be dramatic." Richard's voice was clinical. "We had fun, but I'm moving to Manhattan next month to oversee our East Coast expansion. The board is announcing my promotion to COO next week. I need someone who can navigate those social circles, someone who belongs in that world." Sarah pressed a hand to her stomach, tears now streaming freely down her face. "And what about the babies?" she whispered. Richard's eyebrow raised slightly. "Babies? Plural?" Sarah nodded. The early ultrasound showed 2 gestational sacs. Twins. Something flickered across Richard's face, a momentary crack in his composure, before the mask slid back into place. "I'm not responsible for your mistakes, Sarah. You and that would be an unbearable burden for me and my family." The words branded themselves into Sarah's memory, searing hot and permanent. Your mistakes. Unbearable burden. If you choose to have that, Richard continued, gesturing dismissively toward her stomach, that's your problem. Sarah could barely see through her tears. How can you say that? These are your children too. Are they? His voice was suddenly sharp. We've always used protection. This seems awfully convenient timing, doesn't it? The accusation slapped her harder than any physical blow could have. You think I did this on purpose? To trap you? Richard didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached inside his jacket and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the coffee table between them. I'm flying to New York tomorrow morning for a week of meetings. When I return, I want you and your things gone from this apartment. Sarah stared at the envelope. You're throwing me out? Just like that? There's $1,000 in there, he said, as if he were being extraordinarily generous. That should cover a ticket back to Nebraska. I can't go back to Nebraska, Sarah said, thinking of her father, the stern pastor who had barely spoken to her since she moved in with Richard without marriage. My family won't. That's not my concern. Richard checked his watch. A Patek Philippe she'd once overheard cost more than $40,000. I have dinner reservations with investors. Don't wait up. He turned toward the door, then paused. And Sarah, don't try anything foolish. My family's lawyers will ensure any paternity claims are thoroughly investigated. Trust me when I say you don't want to go down that road. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded to Sarah like the final period on a sentence she hadn't realized was ending. The phone call to Omaha the next morning was brief and devastating. You've made your bed, Sarah Elizabeth. Her father's voice crackled through the line, heavy with disappointment. You chose to live in sin with that man against our counsel. We warned you this would happen. Dad, please, Sarah begged, her voice hoarse from a night of crying. I'm pregnant, with twins. I have nowhere to go. The silence stretched for several seconds before her father responded. Perhaps this is God's way of showing you the consequences of your choices." "So you won't help me?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "You can come home when you're ready to repent properly," he said stiffly, "but not with another man's children born out of wedlock. The congregation would never understand." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She sat on the edge of the bed, Richard's bed in Richard's apartment, surrounded by the small pile of belongings she'd managed to pack. 3 years of her life fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. The ultrasound picture lay on the nightstand, 2 tiny smudges that had irrevocably altered her future. She tried calling Melissa, her old college roommate who had moved to Boston after graduation. Melissa had always said Sarah could visit any time. "Of course you can stay with me," Melissa said, her voice crackling over the bad connection. "But only for a couple weeks, tops. I just got laid off from Lehman Brothers. The whole financial sector is a mess. I'm actually moving back to my parents' place in Ohio at the end of the month." It wasn't ideal, but it was something. A starting point. 2 weeks to figure out her next move. Sarah picked up the envelope Richard had left. $1,000. The one-way bus ticket to Boston would cost nearly $200. That left $800 to find an apartment, survive until she could get a job, and somehow prepare for twins. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough, but it was all she had. At the Greyhound station, Sarah purchased her ticket to Boston, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. The terminal was busy with travelers, some laughing, some crying, all moving toward some destination, some purpose. Sarah felt adrift, unmoored from everything familiar. She'd left a note for Richard, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps some part of her still hoped he would read it and change his mind. Call her. Tell her it had all been a terrible mistake. Richard. I'm not taking anything that isn't mine. I've left the key on the counter and the credit card you gave me for emergencies. I never tried to trap you. I never asked for more than you wanted to give. I thought what we had was real. I hope someday you regret what you've done. Sarah. As she boarded the bus, rain began to fall, streaking the windows and blurring the Chicago skyline. Sarah found a seat near the back, away from other passengers, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. One hand moved protectively to her stomach. "It's just us now," she whispered to the tiny lives growing inside her. "But I promise I'll figure this out. Somehow." The bus pulled away from the terminal, wipers beating a steady rhythm against the increasing rain. Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. She had no way of knowing that 15 years later, she would be standing on a stage in Seattle, receiving applause as one of America's most powerful businesswomen, while the man who had discarded her would watch from the shadows, ruined by his own choices. The rain-streaked window of the Greyhound bus blurred Boston into watercolor smudges as it pulled into South Station. Sarah Williams blinked awake, her neck stiff from 23 hours of fitful sleep in the uncomfortable seat. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why. Then reality crashed back. The pregnancy test, Richard's cold dismissal, the emptied bank accounts, her father's rejection. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, still flat beneath her wrinkled blouse. "We're here," she whispered to the twins growing inside her, trying to infuse her voice with a confidence she didn't feel. The terminal bustled with early morning commuters as Sarah dragged her 2 suitcases through the crowd, her backpack heavy on her shoulders. She found a quiet corner and pulled out her phone to call Melissa, watching the device power up with growing anxiety. 3 missed calls from Richard. No messages. Her finger hovered over his name before she firmly pressed Melissa's contact instead. "Sarah, are you here?" Melissa's voice was bright but strained. "Just got in," Sarah confirmed. "Terminal's packed. I'm so sorry, but I got called into a last-minute interview. Can you grab a coffee somewhere? I'll text you my address and we can meet there in about 2 hours." Sarah agreed, ending the call with a forced smile that immediately dropped from her face. 2 more hours of waiting. She found a small cafe, ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu, and nursed it slowly, making it last while she used the cafe's Wi-Fi to search for jobs and apartments in Boston. The prices made her stomach clench. $800 wouldn't cover even the cheapest security deposit, let alone first month's rent. And who would hire a visibly pregnant woman? The coffee turned bitter in her mouth. When Sarah finally arrived at Melissa's apartment, a cramped studio in a rundown building, her friend's enthusiastic hug couldn't mask the awkwardness beneath. "It's cozy," Sarah offered, glancing around the space barely large enough for Melissa's futon and desk. Melissa's smile tightened. "About that. I meant what I said on the phone. I'm really in a bind, Sarah. Lehman's collapse has the whole financial sector in panic mode. My parents are coming this weekend to help me move back to Ohio." "I understand," Sarah said, though panic was rising in her throat. "I'll figure something out." "You can stay until Friday," Melissa offered apologetically, "and I've made a list of resources." She handed Sarah a piece of paper. "There's a women's shelter that might have space." Sarah stared at the words, "Mercy House for Women," written in Melissa's looping handwriting. A shelter. It had come to this so quickly. 3 days later, Sarah stood outside Mercy House, a converted Victorian home in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The worn steps creaked under her weight as she approached the peeling blue door, suitcases in tow. "First time?" asked the gray-haired woman who answered her knock, compassion in her tired eyes. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. "I'm Margaret. Come on in, dear. We'll get you settled." The intake process was mercifully brief. Yes, she was pregnant. No, she had no income currently. No, there was no family support. No, the father wasn't involved. Each question another cut to her dignity. "We can offer you a bed for 30 days, Margaret explained, leading Sarah up a narrow staircase. "After that, we reassess based on your progress finding work and housing." The room held 4 sets of bunk beds, 7 already occupied by women of various ages. Sarah's assigned bed was a bottom bunk in the corner. A small locker stood beside it. Bathrooms down the hall, shared with everyone on this floor. Curfews 9 p.m. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. "You're on your own for lunch," Margaret explained. "Job boards in the common room. Check it daily." That night, lying on the thin mattress beneath a scratchy blanket, Sarah listened to the unfamiliar sounds of strangers breathing. A woman across the room sobbed quietly. Another snored. Someone whispered urgent prayers. The twins fluttered inside her, their first movements, like butterfly wings against her insides. Sarah pressed her hand against her stomach, tears sliding silently into her pillow. "We'll be okay," she promised them in a whisper. Somehow. The job search began the next morning. Sarah wore her nicest blouse, one that still fit her changing body, and walked 6 blocks to save bus fare. The first interview was at a boutique clothing store. "Your resume is impressive," the manager said, glancing at Sarah's business administration coursework, "but you're overqualified for retail." "I need the work," Sarah insisted. "I'm reliable, I learn quickly, and I have retail experience." The manager's eyes dropped to Sarah's midsection, lingering just a moment too long. "We'll call you." They never did. The second interview, at an office supply store, ended before it began. "We don't hire pregnant women," the recruiter said bluntly. "It's not worth training someone who'll leave in a few months." "That's discrimination," Sarah protested weakly. The woman shrugged. "Prove it." By the 5th day, desperation had set in. Sarah's feet ached, her back throbbed, and her savings dwindled with each bus fare and cheap meal. On the job board at Mercy House, she spotted a posting for Denny's, server wanted, immediate start. She had experience waitressing through college. It wasn't ideal for a pregnant woman, but she had no choice. The manager, a heavy-set man named Frank, hired her on the spot. "You have experience, that's what matters," he said, not commenting on her condition. "Night shift, 6 to midnight. Tips are decent. Can you start tomorrow?" Sarah nodded gratefully. "Thank you. You won't regret it." The first week at Denny's was brutal. Sarah wore the largest uniform shirt they had, hoping to conceal her pregnancy for as long as possible. Her feet swelled in the required non-slip shoes. The smell of certain foods, especially eggs, triggered waves of nausea she fought to control. But she kept a smile plastered on her face, memorized the menu quickly, and moved as efficiently as her body allowed. Some nights, she made enough in tips to justify the exhaustion. Other nights, particularly Mondays and Tuesdays, she went home with less than $20 after a 6-hour shift. Every penny went into a coffee can she kept in her locker at the shelter. In the mornings, while other residents slept or watched daytime television, Sarah used the shelter's shared computer to complete her online business courses. She had 3 classes left to finish her degree, and the university had granted her an extension after she explained her situation. The screen's blue light made her eyes burn, and the uncomfortable chair aggravated her back pain, but she forced herself to focus. Education was her only way out. "You're different from most who come through here," Margaret commented one morning, finding Sarah hunched over spreadsheets and financial projections. "Most don't have your advantages." Sarah looked up, puzzled. "Advantages? Education, skills. You speak the language of business," Margaret explained. "Don't waste that." By the 5th month, Sarah could no longer hide her pregnancy beneath the Denny's uniform. Twin pregnancies showed earlier and more prominently, and her belly now proudly announced her condition to anyone who looked. Frank called her into his office after a particularly busy shift. "Sarah, we need to talk," he began, his expression uncomfortable. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant when I hired you?" Sarah's heart sank. "Would you have hired me if I had?" Frank's silence was answer enough. "I'm still doing my job," Sarah insisted. "My customer satisfaction scores are the highest in the restaurant." "It's not about performance," Frank said. "It's about safety. You're carrying heavy trays, navigating a busy kitchen. It's a liability." He moved her to the kitchen as a prep cook. Fewer hours, lower pay, no tips. Sarah accepted the demotion without complaint. At least it was income. In her 6th month, the twins became increasingly active, kicking and rolling as if competing for space. During an ultrasound at the free clinic, Sarah learned she was having a boy and a girl. The technician printed grainy photos that Sarah taped carefully to the wall beside her bunk. "Do they have names?" asked Lucia, the woman in the bunk above hers, a domestic violence survivor with haunted eyes. "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes." "They're real," Lucia said softly, "and they'll need a mother who believes in herself." The 7th month brought new challenges. Sarah's ankles swelled so severely that her shoes barely fit. Standing for hours in the kitchen became torture. The cramped bottom bunk offered no comfort for her expanding body and aching back. Her 30 days at Mercy House had stretched to 90 through extensions, but Margaret warned her they couldn't continue indefinitely. "We have a waiting list, Sarah," she explained gently. "You need a more permanent solution before these babies arrive." Then came the inevitable. One night in the kitchen, Sarah dropped a tray of prepped vegetables when a sharp pain lanced through her lower back. She caught herself on the counter, breathing hard until it passed. Frank witnessed the incident. The next day, he called her in again. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but you can barely stand upright. It's a safety issue. For you and for us." "Please," Sarah begged, desperation in her voice. "I need this job. I'm having twins. I have nowhere else to go." "It's out of my hands," Frank said, unable to meet her eyes. "Corporate policy. I can give you 2 weeks severance. That's the best I can do." That night, sitting on the edge of her bunk bed, Sarah caressed her prominent belly and finally allowed herself to cry openly. Her coffee can savings amounted to just over $600. Not enough for an apartment, barely enough for a few weeks of cheap motels. The twins would arrive in less than 2 months, and she had nothing prepared for them. No crib, no diapers, not even names. The common room was empty when Sarah wandered downstairs, unable to sleep. On a worn couch, Someone had left behind a magazine, a glossy issue of Fortune. Sarah picked it up idly, flipping through pages filled with success stories and business advice that seemed to belong to another universe. Then a headline caught her eye. From Single Mom to CEO, How Jessica Warner Built a Tech Empire from Her Garage. The article detailed how Warner, abandoned by her husband while pregnant, had started repairing computers in her garage while her baby napped. Now her company, Secure Tech Solutions, was worth over $300 million. Something stirred in Sarah's mind. She had a business degree, almost completed. She understood technology, had even built her own computer in college to save money. And there was a growing movement around electronics recycling and sustainability that fascinated her. Sarah found a cheap notebook and pen in the community supplies drawer. Sitting at the scarred common room table under the flickering fluorescent light, she began to write. Ideas flowed faster than her hand could capture them. A small repair shop that could also reclaim valuable components from discarded electronics. Sustainable, ethical, filling a growing need as technology cycles accelerated and e-waste mounted. By morning, she had filled 10 pages with notes, projections, and sketchy business plans. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of something beyond survival, possibility. The public library became Sarah's office for the next week. Between job applications, she researched grants for women entrepreneurs, small business loans, and incubator programs. Most required collateral she didn't have or business history she couldn't provide. But one listing stood out, the Green Future Initiative in Portland, Oregon, offering mentorship and seed funding to sustainable business concepts. Applications were due in 3 days. Sarah worked feverishly, polishing her business plan, creating projections, and filming a shaky video pitch on the library's computer. She submitted everything with minutes to spare before the deadline, then tried to forget about it as she continued her increasingly desperate job search. 2 weeks later, an email arrived requesting a video interview. Sarah borrowed better clothes from the shelter's donation closet and arranged to use a private office at the library for the call. The interview panel consisted of 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all with expressions of polite skepticism as they noted her obvious pregnancy. "Your concept is intriguing, Ms. Williams," the woman began, "but starting a business is challenging under the best circumstances. And your circumstances are—" She paused delicately. "Complicated," Sarah finished for her. "Yes, I'm 8 months pregnant with twins. Yes, I'm currently in a shelter. But these are temporary conditions. My skills, education, and determination are permanent." The panel exchanged glances. Then one of the men leaned forward. "Why should we take a chance on you?" he asked bluntly. Sarah met his gaze steadily, her answer coming from someplace deep and certain within her. "Because when you have nothing to lose, you have everything to gain. And because I'm going to prove that value isn't something someone assigns to you, it's something you create." The interviewer's eyebrow raised in surprise, followed by the first genuine smile Sarah had seen during the call. 2 weeks later, with a letter of acceptance to the Green Future Initiative and a small grant of $5,000, Sarah boarded a bus to Portland, Oregon. 8 months pregnant, carrying only 1 suitcase of clothes and her notebook full of plans, she watched Boston disappear through the bus window. The interviewer's question about why they should bet on her, and Sarah's response that, "When you have nothing to lose, you have everything to gain," not only secured her the grant, but would become the motto that would eventually lead her to build an empire that would one day make Richard Blackwood seem small by comparison. The Green Future Initiative letter felt like both a life raft and an anchor in Sarah's trembling hands as the bus lumbered into Portland under a persistent Oregon drizzle. 8 months pregnant, exhausted from the 3-day journey across the country, she struggled down the narrow steps of the Greyhound, one hand supporting her massive belly, the other clutching her single suitcase. Portland greeted her with a symphony of gray. Gray skies, gray buildings, gray faces hurrying past. The twins shifted restlessly inside her, as if sensing they had arrived somewhere new, somewhere that might finally be safe. "We're here," Sarah whispered, patting her stomach gently. "Our new beginning." She had exactly $47 left after the bus ticket, barely enough for 2 nights at the cheapest motel she could find online. The Green Future Initiative orientation wasn't scheduled until tomorrow morning. Until then, she was on her own. The wayside motel smelled of industrial cleaner and cigarettes poorly masked by air freshener, but the sheets were clean and the lock on the door worked. Sarah sank onto the sagging mattress, massaging her swollen ankles, trying not to think about what would happen when her 2 days here expired. "One step at a time," she reminded herself, pulling out the letter. "Tomorrow, we meet our future." Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the twins' gymnastics and the unfamiliar sounds of the city. When morning finally arrived, Sarah dressed in her one presentable outfit, black pants with an elastic waistband and a navy blouse she'd carefully kept unwrinkled during the journey. She scraped her hair into a neat ponytail and applied the barest hint of makeup, saved for this exact moment. The Green Future Initiative occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse in what her map indicated was the Pearl District. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early, unable to contain her nervous energy, and found herself facing a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair unlocking the front door. "You must be Sarah," he said, taking in her obvious pregnancy with a raised eyebrow. "Mike Sullivan. I'll be your primary mentor." "Yes, sir. Thank you for this opportunity." Sarah extended her hand, hoping he couldn't feel how badly it was shaking. Mike's handshake was firm, his expression unreadable as he glanced at her suitcase. "Traveling light?" "Everything I own," Sarah admitted, seeing no point in pretense. Something in Mike's face softened. "Let's get you upstairs. There's coffee." The orientation meeting had barely begun when Sarah felt the first twinge, a tightening across her abdomen that took her breath away. She dismissed it as Braxton Hicks contractions, the false labor pains she'd read about. But 20 minutes later, as Mike explained the program's expectations, a sharper pain lanced through her, causing her to gasp audibly. "Ms. Williams?" Mike paused his presentation. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, though her face had gone pale. "Please continue." The 3rd contraction came 5 minutes later, this one strong enough to make her double over. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "How far along are you?" asked a woman seated nearby. 35 weeks, Sarah managed between controlled breaths. "But it's twins, so they often come early," the woman finished, already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No!" Sarah protested, panic rising. "I can't afford—" "Program covers health insurance," Mike interrupted, kneeling beside her chair. "Basic coverage started the moment you were accepted. Now breathe." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. The ambulance, the emergency room, the hurried admission to the maternity ward. Sarah clutching Mike's hand because he was the only familiar face, even though they'd met just hours before. "Is there anyone else we should call?" a nurse asked as they wheeled Sarah toward delivery. "No," Sarah replied, tears mingling with sweat on her face. "There's no one." "She has us now," Mike said firmly to the nurse. "The initiative takes care of its own." In the delivery room, surrounded by medical professionals but no family or friends, Sarah faced the most intense experience of her life. The twins were coming early, but the doctor assured her that at 35 weeks, their chances were excellent. "You're doing great," the labor nurse encouraged as Sarah pushed, her body working to bring her children into the world. "I can't," Sarah gasped after an hour of pushing, exhaustion overwhelming her. "Yes, you can," the nurse insisted. "You've come this far alone. You can do this too." With a primal cry that seemed to come from the very core of her being, Sarah gave a final, massive push. At 6:17 in the evening, Emma Grace Williams entered the world, announcing her arrival with a lusty wail that filled the delivery room. 3 minutes later, her brother Ethan James followed, his cry quieter but equally determined. "They're beautiful," the doctor said, placing the tiny, squirming bundles briefly on Sarah's chest before whisking them away. "But they need a little help with breathing. We're taking them to the NICU." "Wait!" Sarah called desperately, reaching out as her babies disappeared from view. "Where are you taking them?" "Neonatal Intensive Care Unit," the nurse explained gently. "Standard for premature twins. They're small but fighters. You'll see them soon." Left alone in the recovery room, Sarah felt emptier than she had in months. Her body, so long shared with two other beings, was suddenly just hers again. The silence was deafening. Mike appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of concern and awkward determination. "They wouldn't let me in earlier. How are you doing?" Sarah tried to smile but managed only a trembling approximation. "They took them to the NICU. I haven't even really held them yet." Mike crossed to her bedside, unexpectedly placing a small bouquet of daisies from the gift shop on her tray table. "I called the initiative board. We're expediting your housing assistance. And I brought you these. Congratulations, Mom. They say your babies are fighters, just like you." The simple kindness, the first she'd experienced in months, broke the dam. Sarah began to sob, deep, body-racking cries that came from a place of exhaustion, fear, and overwhelming gratitude. Mike awkwardly patted her shoulder until the storm passed. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you to the NICU to meet those kids properly." The next morning, a nurse wheeled Sarah to the NICU, where Emma and Ethan lay in separate incubators, tiny bodies connected to monitors and tubes. At 4 pounds 3 ounces and 4 pounds even, they were small but remarkably complete. Perfect miniature humans with translucent skin and wispy dark hair. "Can I touch them?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "Of course. Open these portholes. They need to know you're here." Sarah reached into Emma's incubator first, gently stroking her daughter's impossibly small hand. The tiny fingers reflexively curled around her index finger, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello, Emma," she whispered. "I'm your mom." She repeated the process with Ethan, whose grip was equally fierce despite his smaller size. Looking at their determined little faces, Sarah made a silent vow. Somehow, some way, she would give these children everything they deserved. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah's life revolved entirely around the NICU. She learned to extract milk with the hospital's pump every 3 hours, producing liquid gold for her babies' developing immune systems. She sat beside their incubators, reading aloud from whatever books the hospital had available, wanting them to know her voice. She learned to change diapers the size of playing cards and to monitor oxygen levels and heart rates with the vigilance of a trained nurse. Through it all, Mike Sullivan proved an unexpected ally. He visited daily, sometimes bringing small items, a soft blanket, newborn clothes from a thrift store, a children's book. More importantly, he helped navigate the bureaucratic maze of social services, ensuring Sarah had access to every available resource. "The initiative found you subsidized housing," he announced on day 12, when both twins were finally breathing unassisted. "One bedroom, not fancy, but clean and near a bus line. It's ready whenever they release the little ones." Sarah looked up from where she was carefully feeding Ethan with a syringe-like device. "I don't know how to thank you." Mike shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You can thank me by making that business plan work. I didn't fight for your acceptance because I felt sorry for you. I fought for it because your idea has merit." The day the twins were discharged, Sarah faced a new reality. The subsidized apartment was indeed small, a single bedroom with just enough space for a full-size bed and the 2 second-hand bassinets Mike had procured. The living area doubled as kitchen and workspace, with a fold-out table against one wall. But it was clean, safe, and most importantly, theirs. That first night alone with the twins, Sarah felt a terrifying weight of responsibility. Every tiny sound from the bassinets sent her bolting upright, checking breathing, adjusting blankets. When both finally slept simultaneously, she used the precious minutes to continue refining her business plan. Within days of settling into the apartment, Sarah began her search for components. The twins strapped to her chest in a second-hand carrier, she visited electronics repair shops, asking for discarded parts. Most turned her away, but a few, intrigued by the woman with newborn twins requesting broken circuit boards, offered boxes of useless materials. At a local salvage yard, the owner watched suspiciously as Sarah sorted through a pile of discarded computers and phones. "What exactly are you looking for, lady?" he finally asked. "Gold, palladium, silver, copper," Sarah replied matter-of-factly, not looking up. "There's valuable metal in all of this that most people throw away." The man snorted. If that were true, someone would be doing it already. Sarah finally looked up, meeting his skeptical gaze. Someone is. Me. A week later, Sarah met James Chen, a retired engineering professor who volunteered at the community center where she attended a parenting class. When he overheard her discussing electronic recycling with another parent, he approached her with genuine interest. "My wife passed last year," he explained when Sarah hesitantly asked if he might be willing to watch the twins occasionally while she collected and processed materials. "The house is too quiet now. Having children around again would be a gift, not a burden." With James's help a few hours each week, Sarah secured a tiny commercial space, little more than a storefront with a back room, in a struggling strip mall. The rent was minimal, the location far from ideal, but it offered something critical: legitimacy. Ecotech Repairs was born, announced by a hand-painted sign in the window. The space was so small that Sarah set up a portable crib in the back room, where the twins could nap while she worked. During their wakeful periods, they lay on a blanket, fascinated by the moving shadows and light, as Sarah repaired phones and laptops at her workbench. Her first regular customer was a college student whose MacBook had been declared irreparable by the Apple Store. "You saved my thesis!" the young woman exclaimed when Sarah recovered her data and replaced the damaged components for half Apple's quoted price. "I'm telling everyone about you." Word spread slowly but steadily. Sarah charged less than the big repair shops and often found creative solutions others missed. Between repairs, she experimented with her extraction methods, developing techniques to recover precious metals from discarded electronics. By the end of the first month, Sarah counted her modest earnings at the tiny kitchen table, the twins sleeping peacefully beside her. The profits barely covered rent for the shop and part of their living expenses. But it was a start. Her start. While embalming her children to sleep that night, Sarah didn't know that her method of recovering components would one day revolutionize the electronics recycling industry and build the empire that would make the Hamilton name synonymous with sustainable innovation far beyond anything any Blackwood had ever achieved. 3 years had passed since that rainy day when Sarah arrived in Portland with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. The sign above the modest storefront now read Ecotech Repairs in crisp green lettering, a far cry from the hand-painted version that had first announced her presence in the struggling strip mall. Inside, the once empty space had transformed into a bustling repair shop with organized shelves of components and a steady stream of loyal customers. "Blue is definitely copper, Emma. Very good," Sarah praised as her 3-year-old daughter sorted a pile of colored circuit board pieces into plastic bins. Beside her, Ethan methodically arranged gold-plated connectors by size, his tiny forehead wrinkled in concentration. "And this shiny one, Mama?" Emma held up a small gold-colored component, her dark curls bouncing as she tilted her head questioningly. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, taking the tiny piece in her palm. "This golden piece is actually real gold, even though it's so small. That's why we save it specially." "Like treasure?" Ethan asked, looking up from his own sorting project, blue eyes wide with wonder. "Exactly like treasure," Sarah smiled, ruffling his hair. "Most people throw these away, but we know better." The twins had become fixtures in the shop, growing up surrounded by technology and sustainability. Sarah had created a child-friendly area in the corner with educational toys, but the children were often more interested in helping with the actual business, mimicking their mother's careful handling of components and tools. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a customer. A young man in a Portland State University sweatshirt entered, clutching a water-damaged laptop. "Please tell me you can save this," he pleaded, placing the device on the counter. "My dissertation is on here, and Apple said the logic board is fried. They wanted $800 to repair it, if it's even possible." Sarah carefully opened the laptop, examining the corrosion on the internal components. "What happened?" "Coffee spill," he admitted sheepishly. "I had automatic cloud backup for most files, but the latest version of my research data isn't synced. I'm desperate." Sarah nodded, already mentally cataloging the needed repairs. "I can recover your data and replace the damaged components for about $300. It'll take 3 days." The student's face lit up with relief. "Are you serious? How can you do it when Apple couldn't?" "They replace whole boards. I repair at the component level," Sarah explained, not mentioning that she'd taught herself micro-soldering techniques by watching online videos after the twins went to bed. "Also, they're incentivized to sell you a new computer." As she wrote up the repair ticket, the student gazed around the shop, noticing the twins organizing components in their corner. "How did you learn to do this stuff?" "Necessity," Sarah answered simply, "and lots of practice." After the student left, Sarah returned to her workbench, the twins now coloring quietly nearby. Late afternoons were her time for experimentation, testing new methods for extracting precious metals from discarded electronics. She had developed a chemical process that separated gold, silver, and palladium from circuit boards with remarkable efficiency, creating a small but growing stockpile of recovered materials. That evening, after tucking the twins into the bed they shared in the corner of the shop's back room, Sarah worked by the light of a single lamp, carefully extracting gold from a pile of discarded smartphone components. The improvised living arrangement wasn't ideal, technically not legal as a residence, but it saved on rent while she built the business. A knock at the shop's back door startled her. Sarah tensed, then relaxed when she recognized Mike Sullivan's familiar outline through the frosted glass. "Working late again?" Mike asked as she let him in, his eyes taking in the sleeping twins and Sarah's exhausted face. "Always," she replied with a tired smile. "What brings you by?" Mike placed a paper bag on her workbench. "Brought you some dinner. And news. There's a customer asking about your extraction process. Not a repair customer. A university professor who heard about your methods." Sarah's eyes widened. "How? I haven't published anything or advertised that part of the business." "Word travels in sustainability circles," Mike shrugged. "Her name's Elena Rodriguez, Environmental Engineering Department at Portland State. She's interested in your recovery rates. Says most industrial processes only recover 70% of precious metals from e-waste." Sarah glanced at her notebook where she'd documented her results. "I'm consistently getting 94% from phones and about 91% from computers." "That's why she wants to meet you," Mike said, his expression serious. "This could be big, Sarah." 2 days later, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped into Ecotech Repairs, her sharp eyes taking in the modest surroundings before settling on Sarah, who was helping a customer with a tablet repair. The twins were entertaining themselves by categorizing a box of salvaged LEDs by color. After the customer left, Sarah extended her hand. "Dr. Rodriguez, I'm Sarah Williams." "Call me Elena," the professor replied, her handshake firm. "I've heard fascinating things about your extraction method. Is it true you achieve a 94% recovery rate?" "On some components, yes," Sarah confirmed. "Would you like to see?" For the next hour, Sarah demonstrated her process, explaining the chemical formulations she'd developed through trial and error. Elena took notes, occasionally asking penetrating questions that revealed her expertise. "This is remarkable," she finally said, watching as Sarah filtered the solution to reveal tiny flecks of pure gold. Most commercial operations use cyanide-based extraction that's both less efficient and environmentally destructive. Your method is greener and more effective. It's slower, though, Sarah admitted, not scaled for industrial use. Not yet, Elena corrected. But it could be. With proper documentation and testing, this could revolutionize electronic recycling. She straightened up, making a decision. I'd like to propose a collaboration. Let's document your process properly and publish the results. It would establish your intellectual ownership and potentially attract investment. Sarah stared at her, momentarily speechless. You want to publish an academic paper with me? I haven't even finished my degree. Intelligence isn't measured by degrees, Elena said firmly. You've created something valuable here. The question is, what do you want to do with it? That night, after the twins were asleep, Sarah sat at her small desk, considering Elena's proposal. Publication would mean visibility, perhaps funding, perhaps competition. It was a risk, but one with potential rewards that extended beyond money. Recognition, legitimacy, a chance to scale her vision of sustainable recycling. The next morning, Sarah called Elena to accept her offer. Within weeks, they were working systematically to document each step of the process, testing variations to optimize results. Balancing this new project with the repair business and motherhood stretched Sarah's already limited time to the breaking point. When Portland Community College posted its fall MBA schedule, she hesitated before registering. The classes were evening sessions. When would she study? Who would watch the twins? Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that formal business education was essential for the next phase. If her extraction method had commercial potential, she needed to understand how to protect and monetize it. The first night of class presented an immediate challenge. James Chen, her usual babysitter, was visiting his son in Seattle. With no alternatives, Sarah bundled the twins into their car seats and drove to campus, armed with coloring books and quiet toys. I'm sorry, but children aren't allowed in the classroom, the professor stated flatly when Sarah entered with Emma and Ethan in tow. They'll be quiet, Sarah promised. I don't have childcare tonight and I can't miss the first session. It's against university policy, he insisted, though his expression softened as he looked at the well-behaved 3-year-olds clutching their coloring books. But perhaps just this once, if they stay in the back row. Throughout the semester, Sarah became a familiar sight on campus, the young mother with twins who sat in the back of business classes, children quietly drawing or napping beside her. Some professors were more accommodating than others, but most came to respect her determination. The twins, accustomed to behaving in the repair shop, adapted to the classroom environment with remarkable ease. Sarah's paper with Elena, titled Sustainable Extraction Methodologies for Precious Metals, Recovery from Electronic Waste, was published in the Journal of Environmental Engineering 6 months after their first meeting. Its publication coincided with Sarah's presentation for her MBA marketing class, a business plan for expanding ecotech from a repair shop to a full-scale recycling operation. The presentation took place in a small campus auditorium. Sarah stood at the podium in borrowed business attire, the twins sitting with Elena in the front row. As she outlined her vision for sustainable e-waste processing, she noticed an unfamiliar man in the back, taking notes with unusual intensity. After the presentation, as students and faculty offered congratulations, the stranger approached. Ms. Williams? Nathan Goldberg, Artemis Green Ventures? That was quite impressive. I'd like to discuss your business further. Sarah glanced at Elena, who nodded slightly, a signal that this was significant. I'd be happy to meet Mr. Goldberg. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat across from Nathan in a downtown office, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling as he reviewed her business plan and the published research. I'll be honest, Ms. Williams, Nathan said finally. I came to your presentation skeptical. A single mother running a repair shop with a supposedly revolutionary extraction method? It sounded too good to be true. He closed the folder. But I'm leaving convinced. Your process is exactly the kind of innovation our fund was created to support." He pushed a document across the table. "We'd like to offer you initial funding of $250,000 for 20% equity in Ecotech Solutions." Sarah stared at the check, unable to process the number. $250,000. More money than she'd ever imagined holding. Her hands trembled as she accepted it, the weight of possibility almost overwhelming. "This will fund the move to the new facility?" she asked, finding her voice. "And equipment, staff, everything outlined in your plan," Nathan confirmed. "We believe you've identified a significant market opportunity. Electronic waste is growing exponentially, and your sustainable approach has both ethical and economic advantages." The new facility was a vacant warehouse in an industrial district, 10 times the size of her tiny repair shop. Standing in the empty space a week later, Sarah envisioned workstations, processing equipment, inventory systems. Here, she could process 10 times more material than in her current location. "It's perfect," she told Mike, who had accompanied her to the viewing. "Room to grow, loading dock for deliveries, even a small office area." Mike nodded approvingly. "Who will you hire first?" Sarah had already decided. "I met someone at the shelter where I stayed when I first came to Portland. Jeff. Former construction worker, lost everything in the recession. Nobody will give him a chance because of the gap in his employment." "And you will?" Mike asked, though he already knew the answer. "People gave me a chance when I needed it," Sarah said simply. Jeff's interview took place at a small cafe near the shelter. The big man with weathered features sat awkwardly in the booth, his calloused hands fidgeting with his coffee cup. "Nobody's given me a real shot in years," he admitted, "but I know how to work hard. Always have." "The job requires careful handling of electronics and potentially hazardous materials," Sarah explained. "I can teach you the extraction process, but you'll need to follow protocols exactly." "I can do that," Jeff promised. "Just need someone to believe in me." Within weeks, Sarah had hired and trained 3 employees, all individuals who, like Jeff, needed a second chance. The repair business continued in the front section of the warehouse while the back was dedicated to the extraction operation. Sarah moved between stations, teaching her method with patience and precision, sharing her knowledge generously. The first month in the new facility coincided with Sarah and the twins moving into a small 2-bedroom apartment, their first real home since Portland. The night they moved in, Emma and Ethan raced through the modest space, marveling at having their own bedroom with actual beds instead of makeshift arrangements in the back of the shop. That evening, Sarah hosted a small celebration, pizza on paper plates in their unfurnished living room. Mike, James, and Elena raised paper cups of soda in a toast to Ecotech's expansion. "To small beginnings and big dreams," Mike said, his gruff voice unusually warm. As the twins dozed on a blanket in the corner, Sarah looked around at the people who had become her unlikely support system. From the depths of abandonment, she had found not just survival, but the seeds of something that might one day be extraordinary. The small article in the local newspaper about the single mother revolutionizing electronic recycling seemed insignificant at that moment, but it would be the first of hundreds of stories about Sarah Williams, culminating years later with her photo on the cover of Fortune magazine, which would reach Richard Blackwood's hands at the most humiliating moment of his career. The small article in the Portland Chronicle about the single mother revolutionizing electronic recycling sat on Sarah's desk, a modest validation of the past 3 years of relentless work. 5 years had passed since that cold Chicago day when Richard had handed her an envelope with $1,000 and told her to disappear. Now, at 31, Sarah stood at the precipice of something that felt dangerously like success. "Mom, look!" Emma called from the laboratory corner of Ecotech's expanded facility. At 5 years old, she already showed a remarkable aptitude for scientific observation. If we increase the temperature by just a little, the metal separates faster. Sarah joined her daughter at the workstation where Dr. Rodriguez had set up a controlled experiment. The professor smiled at Emma's enthusiasm, adjusting her safety goggles. "She's right," Elena confirmed, checking the digital thermometer. "Even a 2.7-degree increase improves efficiency to 97.5%. Your daughter has a natural instinct for this." "Just like her mother," Mike Sullivan commented from where he was reviewing inventory reports. At 65, he remained Sarah's most steadfast ally, having transitioned from mentor to operations manager when Ecotech expanded. Across the room, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, methodically dismantling an old transistor radio, his small fingers deftly navigating the internal components with a precision that belied his age. The twins had grown into remarkably different but equally extraordinary children. Emma, with her dark curls and analytical mind, approached the world as a series of fascinating problems to solve. Ethan, quieter and more introspective, possessed an intuitive understanding of how things worked, often fixing devices that stumped adults. "First day of kindergarten tomorrow," Sarah reminded them as she checked her watch. "We need to head home and get your backpacks ready." The morning of the twins' first school day dawned bright and clear. Sarah helped them into their carefully selected outfits, Emma insisting on her science dress with planets and atoms printed on the fabric, Ethan choosing a button-up shirt like Mike wears. "You look so grown up," Sarah told them, her voice catching as she straightened Ethan's collar. Where had the tiny, fragile babies in the NICU gone? These confident, curious children seemed to have appeared overnight. At Parkside Elementary, Sarah walked them to their classroom, kneeling to give last-minute reminders and reassurances. "Remember, I'll pick you up at 3 o'clock right here," she said, smoothing Emma's hair. "We know, Mom," Emma replied with the slightly exasperated tone of someone who had heard instructions multiple times. "We'll be okay," Ethan added quietly, patting Sarah's arm with surprising gentleness. When the teacher called for students to enter, the twins gave Sarah quick hugs before joining the line of children. They didn't look back, already moving forward into their new adventure. Sarah maintained her composure until she reached her car, where tears finally escaped. They weren't sad tears exactly, more a complex mixture of pride, wonder, and a bittersweet recognition that her babies were growing up. "They're okay," she reassured herself, starting the engine. "They're more than okay." 2 weeks later, Emma burst through the door of their modest apartment, waving a paper triumphantly. "Mom, I told everyone about your metal rescue business," she announced, presenting a crayon drawing of stick figures separating colorful pieces from what appeared to be computer parts. "It's my show-and-tell project. I explained how you save treasures from the trash." Sarah examined the drawing, recognizing the Ecotech logo carefully reproduced in the corner. "This is wonderful, Emma." "Teacher said it was the most interesting presentation," Emma added proudly. "Most kids just brought toys." That same evening, Sarah found Ethan in his room, surrounded by pieces of an old radio James had given him. The device had been declared broken beyond repair, but Ethan's small face wore an expression of intense concentration as he reconnected a wire. "What are you doing, buddy?" Sarah asked, sitting beside him on the carpet. Without looking up, Ethan reconnected the final component and pressed the power button. The radio crackled to life, playing a jazz station. "Fixed it, Mommy," he said with a small, satisfied smile. "It was just a loose wire." Sarah pulled him into a hug, marveling at his natural talent. "You're amazing. You know that?" As summer transitioned to fall, Sarah worked with increasing intensity on perfecting her extraction process. What had begun as an improvised method in a tiny storefront had evolved into a sophisticated technique that recovered precious metals at rates that exceeded industry standards. The breakthrough came on a rainy October afternoon. After months of experimentation, Sarah and Elena finally documented a process that consistently achieved 97.5% recovery of precious metals from circuit boards, nearly 20% better than the leading industrial methods. "We need to patent this," Elena said, reviewing their final test results. This is too valuable to leave unprotected. The patent application process was daunting, expensive, complex, and far outside Sarah's expertise. But Elena introduced her to a friend who taught intellectual property law, who agreed to handle the application for a reduced fee. "Think of it as an investment in the future of sustainable technology," the lawyer said when Sarah expressed concern about the cost. This process could transform electronic recycling globally. 6 months of anxious waiting followed. Ecotech continued to grow, now employing 25 people, many of whom came from shelters, halfway houses, or re-entry programs. Sarah insisted on hiring those who, like her, needed a second chance. The day the patent approval letter arrived, Sarah stared at the official envelope with trembling hands. "Open it," Mike urged. The entire staff gathered around her desk in nervous anticipation. The single sheet of paper confirmed what they'd hoped. Patent US 104575583B2. Method and apparatus for sustainable extraction of precious metals from electronic waste had been granted to Sarah Williams and Elena Rodriguez. The modest Ecotech facility erupted in cheers. James Chen, now a regular fixture at company events, popped open a bottle of sparkling cider for a toast. "To Sarah," he announced, "who sees value where others see waste." News of the patent spread quickly through industry channels. Within weeks, representatives from major technology companies began contacting Ecotech, interested in the process that could potentially save millions in recycling costs while reducing environmental impact. 2 executives from Apple arrived unannounced one Tuesday morning, requesting a tour of the facility. Sarah, wearing her usual work attire of jeans and an Ecotech polo shirt, showed them the operation with quiet pride. "Your recovery rate is 30% better than our current methods," the senior executive noted, watching the process demonstration with obvious interest. "And you've achieved this without the toxic chemicals used in conventional extraction?" "Sustainability was always the goal," Sarah explained. "Profitability followed naturally because we're recovering more material with less environmental cost." As Ecotech's reputation grew, an unexpected visitor arrived, a representative from the federal government's Environmental Protection Agency. "The White House is developing a green technology initiative," the woman explained during their meeting. "Your approach to electronic waste management has attracted attention at the highest levels." The prospect of government contracts accelerated Ecotech's growth trajectory dramatically. Sarah recognized that her self-taught business skills would no longer suffice. She needed formal education to navigate the complex world of federal contracting and potential corporate partnerships. With the twins now in school during the day, Sarah enrolled in Portland State's MBA program, focusing on sustainable business practices. The program allowed her to apply her real-world experience directly to her studies, using Ecotech as a case study for many of her projects. Her final MBA thesis, Sustainability as Competitive Advantage, Transforming Environmental Responsibility into Market Leadership, drew on everything she had learned building Ecotech from nothing. The examining committee, which included executives from several Fortune 500 companies, awarded her highest honors. "Your analysis of how sustainability drives profitability challenges conventional business wisdom," the lead examiner commented. "This work could influence corporate environmental policies nationally." On graduation day, Sarah stood at the podium as the selected class speaker, scanning the audience where Mike and James sat with the twins, all dressed in their Sunday best. Emma waved enthusiastically while Ethan gave a shy thumbs up. "The true measure of value," Sarah told the assembled graduates, "isn't something that someone assigns to you. It's something you create and prove day after day through persistence and purpose." Though she didn't mention Richard by name, his dismissive words from years ago, "You're just a waitress from Omaha," echoed in her mind as she accepted her diploma with highest honors. The week following graduation brought another milestone: Ecotech's first major government contract, worth $1.5 million, to process electronic waste from federal agencies across 3 states. "This changes everything," Mike said as they reviewed the contract details. "We'll need to expand again. More space, more equipment, more staff." Sarah nodded, already calculating what they would need. "Let's start looking for a larger facility immediately." The search for a new location led them to a mid-sized industrial building on the outskirts of Portland. Not the gleaming corporate headquarters of her dreams, but a significant upgrade from their current space. The mortgage application, backed by the government contract and Ecotech's growing revenue, was approved without hesitation. As summer approached, Sarah faced another personal milestone, buying her first home. After years in subsidized housing and then a modest apartment, she found a small 3-bedroom house with a fenced backyard in a good school district. Nothing extravagant, but solid and safe, with space for the twins to have separate bedrooms and a small garden. The day they received the keys, Emma and Ethan raced through the empty rooms, their footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. "Can I paint my room green?" Emma called from upstairs. "Can we get a dog now?" Ethan asked, exploring the backyard. Sarah stood in the empty living room, keys clutched in her hand, overwhelmed by how far they had come. 5 years ago, she had slept in a shelter, pregnant and abandoned. Now she owned a business, held a patent and an MBA, and had just bought a home for her children. That night, they ate Chinese takeout on the floor of the empty living room, planning where furniture would go and what colors to paint each room. The twins' laughter filled the space, transforming the house into something more, a home, built not on the foundation of someone else's fortune, but on Sarah's own determination. Later, after tucking the twins into sleeping bags in their empty bedrooms, Sarah sat at her laptop in what would become her home office. Curious, she checked her net worth for the first time, adding the value of Ecotech shares, the patent, their new home, and her modest savings. The number on the screen made her gasp. $2. $7 million. As she put the twins to bed in their own rooms for the first time, Sarah couldn't imagine that, within a decade, she would have to explain to Emma and Ethan why a man with their same last name would appear in headlines, begging for a fraction of the empire she had built alone. Sarah sat in her new home office that evening, staring at the number on her laptop screen. $2. $7 million. It seemed impossible, almost like a cruel joke. Less than 7 years ago, Richard had handed her an envelope with $1,000 and told her she'd never be enough. Now she had built something worth millions, not through inheritance or connections, but through her own innovation and persistence. The twins' soft breathing carried down the hallway from their new bedrooms. Tomorrow they would go furniture shopping, transform these empty rooms into a real home. Sarah closed her laptop and looked out the window at the small backyard illuminated by moonlight. For the first time since that devastating day in Chicago, she allowed herself to feel not just determined, but triumphant. 7 years after Richard's abandonment, Sarah's modest home office had been replaced by a glass-walled executive suite overlooking the main floor of Ecotech Solutions' Portland headquarters. The campus, as employees now called it, sprawled across 3 acres of previously abandoned industrial land, transformed into a model of sustainable architecture with living walls, solar arrays, and rainwater collection systems. Third-quarter projections are exceeding expectations, reported Diane, Sarah's CFO, sliding a tablet across the conference table. Nevada facility comes online next month, which should boost capacity by 30%. We're looking at annual revenue of $24 million. Sarah nodded, reviewing the figures while maintaining her composure. Inside, a part of her still marveled at how far they'd come. From a tiny storefront to this, a company with over 120 employees across 2 states. R&D wants confirmation on the expansion budget, added Mark, her operations director. Dr. Rodriguez believes the new extraction process could increase efficiency another 2%. Approve it, Sarah decided. 2% at our volume means significant gains. She glanced at her watch. I need to leave by 3 today. Emma's science fair. Her executive team nodded understanding. Despite Ecotech's growth, Sarah's priorities remained clear. The twins came first. At Pacific Elementary School's gymnasium, parents crowded around science projects displayed on folding tables. Sarah spotted Emma's project immediately. A sophisticated soil remediation demonstration that looked more like graduate-level work than something created by a 7-year-old. My daughter analyzed soil samples from 5 contaminated industrial sites, Emma explained confidently to the judges, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Using a bioremediation process with specific bacteria, she demonstrated 80% reduction in heavy metal content within 6 weeks. Sarah stood back, allowing Emma her moment. The judges' impressed expressions confirmed what Sarah already knew. Her daughter possessed extraordinary intelligence and curiosity. When the regional champion ribbon was placed on Emma's project, Sarah applauded with the other parents, pride swelling in her chest. That evening at home, Ethan greeted them at the door, laptop in hand. "Mom, I made something for you," he said, his serious expression reminiscent of concentration beyond his years. "What is it, buddy?" Sarah asked, setting down Emma's science project. "A program that organizes all your emails automatically," Ethan explained, opening his laptop to show a simple but elegant interface. "It sorts by priority based on keywords and sender history. See? Important stuff goes here, junk here, and it learns which ones you open first." Sarah examined the program, amazed at what her 7-year-old son had created. "This is incredible, Ethan. Did you code this yourself?" He nodded, a small smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "Mr. James helped me understand some of the harder parts, but I wrote most of it myself." Later, after tucking the twins into bed, Sarah sat in her home office reviewing travel arrangements for an upcoming conference in San Francisco. As founder of a rising star in sustainable technology, speaking invitations now came regularly. This one, the keynote address at the National Sustainability Forum, would put ecotech in front of industry leaders and potential investors. Almost by habit, she opened her browser and typed Blackwood Enterprises. The business news results showed a company in growing distress. Blackwood Enterprises faces investor lawsuit after Hudson Yards project failure. The article detailed how Richard's ambitious Manhattan development had collapsed amid financing problems and regulatory issues, costing investors millions. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his struggles, only a distant curiosity about the man whose rejection had inadvertently launched her on this path. A second article caught her attention. Richard Blackwood separates from socialite Vanessa Carter after 2 years, second divorce in 5 years. The accompanying photo showed Richard leaving a Manhattan restaurant, looking significantly older than his 45 years, with deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. Sarah closed the browser. Richard's life choices were no longer relevant to hers. She had moved beyond the need for vindication. The following weekend, Sarah took the twins fishing with Mike at his favorite spot on the Columbia River. At 67, Mike moved more slowly these days but remained Sarah's most trusted advisor and a surrogate grandfather to Emma and Ethan. "Doctor says I should take it easy," Mike admitted as they baited hooks, the twins absorbed in examining river insects nearby. "Heart's not what it used to be." Sarah looked up sharply. "Mike, why didn't you tell me sooner?" He shrugged, uncomfortable with concern. "Not a big deal. Just need some medication adjustments." "It is a big deal," Sarah insisted. "Your family. Whatever you need, specialists, time off, just say the word." Mike's weathered face softened. "You're a good kid, Sarah. Those two as well." He nodded toward the twins. "You've built something special, and I don't just mean the company." Later that afternoon, as the twins napped in the back seat on the drive home, Sarah reflected on Mike's words. She had built something special, a family forged not through conventional bonds, but through choice and commitment. The following week brought a pivotal meeting. Representatives from the federal government's Green Initiative program arrived to evaluate Ecotech's technology for potential nationwide implementation. "Our analysts are impressed with your recovery rates," the lead representative said, reviewing the demonstration results. Your technology is exactly what the Green Government Initiative needs for federal facilities. We've refined the process continuously, Sarah explained, leading the group through the production floor. Each iteration improves efficiency while reducing environmental impact. The President's directive is to reduce federal e-waste by 70% within 5 years. The representative continued, your system could be instrumental in achieving that goal. That evening at dinner, Emma looked up from her plate with the directness that characterized her approach to everything. Mom, why don't we ever talk about our dad? The question, though inevitable, caught Sarah off guard. Ethan set down his fork, equally interested in the answer. Sarah took a deep breath. She had always been honest with the twins about their origin in age-appropriate ways, but had avoided dwelling on Richard's rejection. Your biological father chose not to be part of our lives, she explained carefully. He decided before you were born that he wasn't ready for the responsibility of children. But why? Ethan asked, his blue eyes, so like Richard's, filled with genuine curiosity rather than pain. Sometimes people make choices based on fear or selfishness, Sarah answered. He was focused on his career and worried that having a family would hold him back. Does he know about us now? Emma pressed. That we exist? I don't know, Sarah admitted. I haven't had contact with him since before you were born. Are we supposed to be sad about it? Ethan wondered aloud. Sarah reached across the table, taking each of their hands. There's no supposed to about feelings. You might feel curious or sad or angry sometimes, and that's okay. But remember, you have many men in your lives who love you. Mike, who taught you to fish, James, who helps with your projects, Dr. Rodriguez, who mentors your science work. Family isn't just about biology. The twins seemed to consider this, exchanging one of their silent communications that Sarah had never quite deciphered. I think we're lucky, Emma finally declared. Some kids have dads who don't care about them even though they live in the same house. We have lots of people who chose to love us. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood before a crowded auditorium in San Francisco, delivering the keynote address at the National Sustainability Forum. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected confidence and authority, she spoke about transforming environmental challenges into business opportunities. Sustainability isn't charity, she told the audience of executives and investors. It's the most rational business strategy for a resource-constrained future. At Ecotech, we've demonstrated that doing good and doing well aren't mutually exclusive. The standing ovation that followed her speech confirmed Sarah's arrival as a thought leader in the industry. As attendees crowded around afterward with business cards and partnership proposals, a young reporter from the Wall Street Journal requested an interview. You've built Ecotech from nothing to an industry leader in just 7 years, the reporter noted. What's your secret? Sarah considered the question. There's no secret, just necessity, innovation, and persistence. We started in a space smaller than this podium. Never underestimate the power of someone with nothing to lose. The real breakthrough came the following month when Sarah received the call she'd been working toward for years. Ms. Williams, this is Senator Martinez's office. The Green Government Initiative contract has been approved. $50 million over 3 years to implement Ecotech systems in federal facilities nationwide. The announcement transformed Ecotech overnight from a promising regional company to a nationally recognized leader in sustainable technology. Local papers featured Sarah's story, the single mother who built a multi-million-dollar enterprise while raising twins. To celebrate the contract and the twins' 7th birthday, Sarah planned their first real family vacation, a week at Disney World. Watching Emma and Ethan experience the pure, uncomplicated joy of childhood, racing between attractions, faces sticky with ice cream, eyes wide with wonder, Sarah felt a completeness she hadn't known was possible. Is this what you imagined? James asked, as they watched the twins exclaim over fireworks exploding above Cinderella's castle. When you started all this? Not even close, Sarah admitted. I was just trying to survive then. This She gestured toward her children's upturned, awestruck faces. "This is beyond anything I could have dreamed." Upon returning to Portland, Sarah closed on a modest but beautiful home on a hillside overlooking the Pacific. The night they moved in, Mike and James joined them for a small celebration, raising glasses of champagne in the spacious living room while the twins explored their new territory. "To small beginnings," Mike toasted, his gruff voice warm with affection, "and to big dreams." As Ecotech expanded and the twins flourished, Richard Blackwood faced his second divorce and the downfall of the family empire, unaware that their paths would cross again one day in circumstances that would make that abandonment in Chicago seem like the greatest strategic error of his life. As Ecotech expanded and the twins flourished, Sarah couldn't help but occasionally wonder if Richard had any inkling of what he had discarded. Not that it mattered anymore. The painful chapters of her past had transformed into the prologue of something extraordinary, something entirely her own. 10 years had passed since that rainy Chicago day. The Ecotech Solutions headquarters now dominated its corner of Portland's industrial district, a gleaming monument to sustainable innovation with over 1,000 employees across 3 states. The small repair shop had evolved into a corporation that revolutionized how the world handled electronic waste, with patents, government contracts, and a reputation for excellence that extended beyond American borders. Sarah's private jet descended toward Seattle, where she was scheduled to speak at the Pacific Northwest Business Leadership Conference. At 36, she had grown into her role as CEO with a quiet confidence that commanded respect without demanding it. Her simple pearl earrings caught the light as she reviewed her presentation notes one final time. "Ms. Hamilton, we'll be landing in 10 minutes, the pilot announced over the intercom. Sarah had reverted to her maiden name after the divorce that Richard had arranged without ever seeing her again. It felt right. The name of the woman who had built something from nothing, rather than the name of the man who had discarded her when she needed him most. Her assistant handed her a tablet displaying the latest email from her publicity team. "The Forbes issue is hitting newsstands tomorrow. They're calling it the 50 Most Powerful Women in Business. You're ranked 14th. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, another milestone that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. The article highlighted her innovative approach to sustainability and the rapid growth of Ecotech Solutions from a small repair shop to a corporation valued at nearly $2 billion. As the jet touched down and taxied to a private hangar, Sarah's thoughts turned to Emma and Ethan. At 10 years old, they had blossomed into extraordinary children, each brilliant in their own way. Emma had already won national recognition for her environmental science projects, while Ethan's gift for programming had produced applications that Ecotech now incorporated into their tracking systems. The sleek company car waited on the tarmac, a far cry from the bus that had carried her across the country with nothing but a suitcase and desperate hope. The driver held the door as Sarah stepped inside, her tailored suit and confident bearing offering no hint of the frightened, pregnant waitress who had once been told she would never be enough. Back in Portland, the twins were finishing their day at Westridge Academy, the private school that nurtured their exceptional talents. When Sarah had first toured the campus, with its advanced STEM programs and arts enrichment, she'd fought back tears thinking of how far they'd come from the days when she'd balanced textbooks on her pregnant belly in a shelter's common room. After her Seattle presentation, Sarah flew directly home, the house quiet when she arrived. Mike had picked up the twins for their weekly dinner, a tradition that had become sacred as his health stabilized with proper medical care that Sarah insisted on paying for. She kicked off her heels and poured a glass of wine, opening her laptop to scan the business news. It had become a habit, not one she was proud of, but one she couldn't seem to break. Once a month or so, she would search for news about Blackwood Enterprises. Tonight's results showed further decline. Blackwood Enterprises sells Chicago headquarters in bid to stabilize finances. The article detailed how the once prestigious company had been forced to liquidate assets after years of mismanagement and failed projects under Richard's leadership. Sarah closed the browser, feeling neither satisfaction nor resentment. Richard's failures weren't her concern, just as her successes weren't his achievement. They had become strangers connected only by biology and distant memory. The front door opened to the sound of childish laughter. "Mom, we're home!" Emma called, racing into the living room with Ethan close behind. Mike followed more slowly, his smile warm beneath his now silver hair. "Did you win your presentation?" Ethan asked, climbing onto the sofa beside Sarah. She laughed, pulling him close. "It wasn't a competition, buddy." "Everything's a competition," Emma declared confidently, settling on Sarah's other side. "And Mom always wins." Mike chuckled. "These two cleaned me out at miniature golf. I think we have future champions here." After Mike left and the twins were in bed, Sarah sat on her balcony overlooking the Pacific. The mansion, because she could no longer pretend it was just a nice house, stood on a bluff with panoramic ocean views. The distant rhythm of waves provided a soundtrack for reflection on how dramatically life had changed. The next morning, Sarah reviewed blueprints for Ecotech's international expansion with her executive team while the twins were at school. The company now employed over 40 people from the shelter where she had once stayed, a hiring practice that had become part of Ecotech's corporate identity. "The Tokyo facility is on schedule for a March opening," reported her international operations director, "and the London negotiations are progressing well." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Make sure our corporate housing there accommodates families. I want our relocated employees to feel supported." After the meeting, Sarah visited the company's recruitment center where a new cohort of trainees, many formerly homeless or recently incarcerated, were learning extraction techniques. She made a point of knowing every trainee's name and story, remembering all too clearly how it felt to be judged solely by circumstances rather than potential. That evening at home, the twins sat at the dining table overlooking the ocean, sharing stories from their day. Emma had been selected to represent her grade at a regional science competition, while Ethan had debugged a program that even his computer teacher couldn't fix. "Ms. Perkins said she's never seen a fifth grader code at my level," Ethan said, his quiet pride evident. "That's because most fifth graders didn't have to figure out how to optimize inventory systems for an international corporation before they lost their baby teeth," Emma teased, though her tone held genuine admiration for her brother's talents. Sarah watched them with a fullness in her heart that sometimes still surprised her. These brilliant, confident, kind children bore little resemblance to the terrified young woman who had carried them across the country on a desperate gamble. "I have news too," she told them. "Forbes magazine included me in their list of the 50 most powerful businesswomen in America." The twins exchanged a glance, one of those silent communications that Sarah had learned to recognize but never fully decipher. "Are you surprised?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. "A little," Sarah admitted. "When I started Ecotech, I was just trying to survive." "But you did more than survive," Ethan said thoughtfully. "You changed things." Later that week, as Sarah helped Emma prepare her science project on water purification systems, her daughter asked the question that occasionally surfaced, despite Sarah's best efforts to provide a complete family environment. "Do you think our father knows about us now, with you being in magazines and everything?" Sarah set down the water sample they were testing. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's possible he's seen articles about Ecotech, but they don't usually mention you and Ethan. Would he want to know us if he knew how we turned out?" Emma pressed, her dark eyes, so like Sarah's own, serious and searching. "That's not a question I can answer," Sarah said carefully. "His choices weren't about who you were or might become. They were about his own limitations." Emma considered this. "I used to imagine him sometimes, wondering if we have his laugh or if he likes the same books I do. But lately I realized it doesn't really matter. We have you and Mike and James and Dr. Rodriguez. We have real people who love us, not just DNA." Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug, overwhelmed by the wisdom in her young voice. The next day, Ethan demonstrated his latest creation, an app that tracked the origin and processing of every component that passed through Ecotech's facilities. "It's like ancestry for recycled metals," he explained, showing Sarah how the system worked. "We can tell customers exactly where their reclaimed materials came from and how they were processed." Sarah examined the elegant interface, recognizing the commercial potential immediately. "This is brilliant, Ethan. The marketing team is going to love this for our corporate clients." His face lit up at her approval. "I already showed it to the development team. They want to implement it next quarter." That evening, Sarah sat the twins down for a more detailed conversation about their father, a talk she'd been preparing for as they grew old enough to understand more complex truths. "I think you're old enough now to know more about your father," she began, pulling out an old photograph she'd kept in a desk drawer. It showed Richard at a charity gala, his expression confident, almost arrogant. "His name is Richard Blackwood. He was the heir to a real estate development company in Chicago. We met when I was working as a waitress while finishing my business degree." The twins examined the photo with curiosity rather than the hunger for connection Sarah had feared. "When I told him I was pregnant with you two, he made it clear that he didn't want the responsibility. He said some hurtful things, that I would never fit into his world, that I would be a burden to him and his family." "That was stupid of him," Emma said flatly. "It was his loss," Ethan added with surprising firmness. Sarah smiled at their protective instinct. "He is part of your genetic heritage, and that's why I'm sharing this with you. But our choices define us more than our DNA. The people who have been in our lives, who have loved you, taught you, supported you, they're your real family. Does he know how successful you are now?" Emma asked, her innate sense of justice evident in her tone. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "But that was never the point of building Ecotech. I didn't do it to prove him wrong. I did it because it needed to be done, and because it gave us a future." As the twins processed this information, Sarah fielded their questions with candor and care, emphasizing that Richard's rejection reflected his character, not their worth. Later that night, as she checked on them before bed, she found them engaged in quiet conversation, heads close together as they often were when working through important ideas. "We're okay, Mom," Emma assured her, seeing Sarah's concerned expression. "We were just saying that we're lucky." "Lucky?" Sarah questioned. Ethan nodded. "Most kids just get whatever parents they're born to. We got to have you choose us every single day." The invitation to be the keynote speaker at the Global Sustainable Technology Conference in Seattle arrived the following week. It was the most prestigious speaking engagement of Sarah's career thus far, and it came with an unexpected question. Would she consider allowing the twins to be recognized at the event as part of Ecotech's family-centered corporate story? Sarah discussed it with Emma and Ethan, who surprised her with their enthusiasm. "We've never been to one of your big events," Emma pointed out, "and we're old enough now." "I want to see how people react to your speeches," Ethan added. "Mike says you're really inspiring." As Sarah prepared for the conference, selecting appropriate attire for the twins and arranging their first flight on the corporate jet, she had no idea that the event would bring a collision of past and present that would change all their lives. She couldn't know that Richard Blackwood, desperate to save his failing company, would also attend that conference, or that 15 years after abandoning her, he would watch from the audience as she accepted an award as one of America's most successful entrepreneurs, with two remarkable children by her side who bore his DNA but not his name. As the sun cast golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ecotech's executive suite, Sarah stared at the conference invitation in her hands. The Global Sustainable Technology Conference in Seattle represented more than just another speaking engagement. It symbolized her arrival at the pinnacle of her industry. 15 years after being abandoned, pregnant, and penniless, she would stand on that stage as a recognized leader, a visionary whom others sought to emulate. "The IPO paperwork is nearly complete," Marcus, her lead financial advisor, said as he placed another document on her desk. "SEC filing will happen next week. Conservative valuation stands at $2.8 billion. Sarah nodded, still processing the number. $2.8 billion. The repair shop that had once doubled as the twins' nursery had transformed into something beyond her wildest expectations. "And the projections post-IPO?" she asked, setting aside the conference invitation. "Analysts predict a 20% jump on opening day, potentially more given the current interest in sustainable tech stocks," Marcus replied, his normally stoic expression betraying a hint of excitement. "There's considerable buzz among institutional investors." Sarah turned her chair toward the expansive windows, looking out at the Ecotech campus below. 3 buildings now, with a 4th under construction. Solar arrays glinted on every rooftop, while the living walls bloomed with native plants, making the industrial complex seem almost organic, alive. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her personal stylist, Rebecca, entered with several garment bags. "For Seattle," Rebecca explained, hanging the options on the display rack in the corner of Sarah's office. "I've selected pieces that project authority without being intimidating. The emerald suit particularly complements your coloring while nodding to the sustainability theme." Sarah approached the rack, running her fingers over the fine fabrics, a far cry from the threadbare uniform she'd worn at Denny's. Her hand paused on the emerald suit, then moved to a delicate gold pendant necklace with 2 small intertwined diamonds. "This is perfect," she said, lifting the necklace. "The twins." "I had it custom-made at Tiffany," Rebecca confirmed. "I thought it would be meaningful for this particular event since Emma and Ethan will be attending." The thought of the twins accompanying her to Seattle sent a flutter of pride through Sarah's chest. At 15, they were no longer children but emerging young adults, each already mapping impressive trajectories. She adjusted the pendant around her neck, the weight of the diamonds against her skin a physical reminder of her greatest treasures. Her private line rang, displaying Emma's school number. "Ms. Hamilton, this is Principal Westfield from Lakeside Academy," came the formal voice. "I'm calling about Emma's science project. It's, well, quite extraordinary. MIT has expressed interest in having her present at their junior symposium next month." Sarah smiled, pride warming her voice. "That's wonderful news. What's the project focused on?" "Bioremediation of heavy metal contamination in urban soil," the principal explained. "Her process shows significantly better results than current commercial applications. The MIT admissions office has already reached out informally about early admission tracks." After ending the call, Sarah sat back, momentarily overwhelmed. Her daughter, not yet 16, being courted by MIT. Her son developing algorithms that seasoned programmers envied. Her company on the verge of a multi-billion-dollar public offering. The universe had a peculiar sense of justice. Later that afternoon, her sleek company car pulled into the circular drive of Lakeside Academy, where the twins had transferred after outgrowing their previous school's advanced programs. Sarah spotted them immediately among the dispersing students, Emma gesturing animatedly as she explained something to her brother, Ethan nodding with the focused attention he gave to complex problems. They slid into the back seat, both immediately launching into accounts of their day. "The MIT coordinator called personally," Emma exclaimed, dark eyes sparkling with excitement. "They're considering incorporating my bioremediation process into their environmental engineering curriculum. And I finished optimizing that algorithm for the component tracking system," Ethan added, more reserved but equally proud. "We can implement it next quarter and increase efficiency by at least 22%. Sarah listened, marveling at these extraordinary young people who had emerged from such uncertain beginnings. Emma, with her analytical mind and fierce determination, had inherited Sarah's dark hair and Richard's defined jawline, a feature Sarah noticed more as Emma matured. Ethan, quieter and more introspective, had inherited Richard's striking blue eyes, though thankfully none of his father's coldness lived within them. "I have news too," Sarah said as they turned onto the private road leading to their hillside home. "We've been invited to the Global Sustainable Technology Conference in Seattle next month. All 3 of us." "Really?" Emma's eyes widened. You mean we get to go to one of your big corporate events? It's time, Sarah nodded. You're old enough now, and frankly, you both understand the business well enough to engage meaningfully with the attendees. Will there be other tech companies there? Ethan asked, already calculating networking opportunities. Everyone who matters in sustainable technology, Sarah confirmed, plus government officials, investors, media. It's quite significant that they've asked for you both to attend. At home, over dinner on their Ocean View terrace, they discussed the Seattle trip in greater detail. The twins' excitement was palpable as they planned which sessions to attend and which industry leaders they hoped to meet. The college forms are practically complete, Emma mentioned as they cleared the table. MIT and Stanford have both indicated strong interest in my bioremediation project. And your preferences? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. MIT for undergrad, Stanford for graduate work, Emma replied without hesitation. Their environmental engineering program is exactly where I want to be. Sarah nodded, remembering the days when she'd worried about affording diapers, let alone Ivy League tuition. Now, substantial trust funds ensured the twins could pursue any educational path they chose, though both had already qualified for merit scholarships that would likely go unused. In his room after dinner, Ethan called Sarah in to demonstrate his latest accomplishment. I managed to perfect that tracking algorithm, he explained, showing her the elegant code on his multiple monitors. It creates a complete chain of custody for every component we process, from collection through refinement. We can implement it next quarter and increase our process efficiency significantly. Sarah studied the program, impressed by its sophistication. This is remarkable, Ethan. The operations team will be thrilled. As the Seattle conference approached, preparations intensified. Sarah's assistant coordinated their travel details while the PR team briefed her on expected media coverage. More than 500 confirmed attendees, her assistant reported during their morning update, including the governor, 3 senators, and CEOs from the largest tech companies in the country. Press coverage includes the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, essentially all major outlets. Sarah absorbed the information, mentally preparing for the high-stakes environment. While such events had become routine for her, bringing the twins added a new dimension of both pride and protectiveness. The day before departure, Sarah received an email from her CFO that momentarily took her breath away. Federal contract confirmed. $2 billion over 5 years for sustainable energy implementation in all federal buildings. Announcement coincides with Seattle conference. This was the contract they'd been negotiating for months, the largest in Ecotech's history and a game-changer for their IPO valuation. Sarah forwarded the email to her executive team with a simple message. We did it. Prepare for a very interesting conference. The twins were equally busy with preparations, selecting appropriate attire and reviewing information about the conference attendees. Sarah had arranged for them to receive proper business attire, Emma in a tailored navy dress that echoed Sarah's professional style, Ethan in a custom suit that made him look startlingly grown up. Their private jet departed Portland International Airport on a clear Thursday morning. The 3 Hamiltons settled comfortably in the luxurious cabin that had replaced bus stations and economy flights in their lives. The suite at the Grand Hyatt is prepared for your arrival, the flight attendant informed them as they began their descent into Seattle. Your security team will meet us on the tarmac. As the plane touched down, Sarah glanced at her children, poised, intelligent, and remarkably well-adjusted despite their unconventional beginnings. Whatever happened at this conference, she had already won the victory that mattered most. The limousine ride from the private aviation terminal to downtown Seattle gave Sarah time to review her notes one final time. The contract announcement would elevate her keynote address from important to historic, a fact not lost on her PR team, who had already prepared statements for the expected media frenzy. "Mom," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her tablet, "did you know Richard Blackwood is on the attendee list?" Sarah's head snapped up, her carefully maintained composure momentarily fractured. "What?" Emma turned her tablet to show the conference registration database she'd somehow accessed. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. He's registered for the Real Estate Sustainability Panel tomorrow morning. Sarah's mind raced. After 15 years without contact, the universe had decided to place them in the same building. The coincidence seemed too precise to be accidental, yet she knew Richard couldn't possibly have orchestrated it. He had no way of knowing the twins would attend. "Does this bother you?" Ethan asked perceptively, studying his mother's reaction. Sarah composed herself quickly. "No, it's a large conference. There's no reason our paths would cross." But even as she said it, Sarah felt the distinct sensation of worlds colliding, her carefully constructed present about to intersect with the past she'd left behind. She touched the twin diamond pendant at her throat, drawing strength from what it represented. At the Grand Hyatt, they were escorted directly to the presidential suite, where their luggage had already been delivered. The twins explored the luxurious space with appropriate appreciation, while Sarah reviewed the final conference schedule with her assistant. "Your keynote is at 11 tomorrow," her assistant confirmed. "The announcement about the federal contract will be made public at 9, so expect significant interest from media and industry insiders." That night, as Sarah stood at the suite's window overlooking Seattle's glittering skyline, she felt an unusual apprehension, not about the speech or the contract announcement, those were familiar territory now, but about the possibility of seeing Richard after all these years. What would he think, seeing the woman he had discarded as not enough, now celebrated as an industry titan? Would he even recognize the twins as his own? She pushed the thoughts away. Richard Blackwood belonged to a chapter of her life that had closed long ago. Tomorrow was about Ecotech's future, not her past. In another hotel across the city, Richard Blackwood sat alone in his standard king room, reviewing the desperate pitch he would deliver to potential investors. As the CEO of a failing company that once dominated the real estate market, he had no idea that the conference he viewed as his last chance for salvation would instead become the stage where he would confront the magnitude of what he had thrown away 15 years earlier. While the presenter announced the revolutionary CEO of Ecotech Solutions, Sarah Hamilton, Richard Blackwood felt the world freeze around him. The waitress from Nebraska he had discarded as insufficient 15 years before was about to take the stage as one of America's most successful and respected executives, and he had no idea that the two teenagers beside her were his own children. The grand ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Seattle gleamed with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic reflections across immaculately arranged tables where America's corporate elite mingled with politicians and celebrities. The air hummed with power and privilege, conversations about billion-dollar deals conducted over champagne flutes and perfectly plated hors d'oeuvres. Richard Blackwood sat at a table near the back, absently twirling the stem of his champagne glass between his fingers. At 50, his once jet-black hair now showed distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, and fine lines of worry had etched themselves permanently around his eyes and mouth. His custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, one of the few remaining artifacts of his former prosperity, couldn't quite disguise the slight slope in his shoulders, the physical manifestation of years of mounting failures. The past decade had not been kind to Blackwood Enterprises. What began with the Hudson Yards disaster during the financial crisis had cascaded into a series of increasingly desperate attempts to recapture former glory. Each failure compounded the last, until the company once valued at billions now teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. This conference represented possibly his final opportunity to attract investors who might salvage what remained of the family legacy. And now, the conference MC's voice cut through Richard's ruminations. "It is my great honor to present this year's Fortune Entrepreneur of the Year award recipient, a woman who revolutionized the sustainable technology sector, transforming a small repair shop in Portland into a global empire valued at $2.8 billion. Richard raised his glass to his lips distractedly, eyes scanning the room for potential investors. He barely registered the name being announced until he saw her. "Please welcome Sarah Hamilton, founder and CEO of Ecotech Solutions." The champagne glass froze halfway to his mouth. The world around him seemed to slow, sounds becoming muffled as though he were suddenly underwater. There, walking confidently toward the stage, was a ghost from 15 years ago. Except this wasn't the uncertain waitress from Nebraska who had pleaded for his help. This woman commanded the room with each measured step, her elegant Valentino gown accentuating a figure that spoke of both strength and grace, her jewelry subtle but obviously expensive, her posture radiating an authority that seemed to bend the very air around her. Sarah Williams. But the MC had called her Hamilton. She'd reverted to her maiden name. Richard's breath caught in his throat as memories flooded back. Her tears, the pregnancy test, his cruel dismissal, the envelope with $1,000 that he'd tossed at her like scraps to a stray. The words he had spoken with such cold finality. "You'll never be enough." "Thank you for this honor," Sarah began, her voice smooth and assured as it filled the ballroom through the sound system. "When I founded Ecotech Solutions in 2008 with just a small repair shop and 2 newborn babies, many told me it was impossible." Babies. The word hit Richard like a physical blow. Fragments of that final conversation in Chicago reassembled themselves in his mind, her voice breaking as she'd told him about the twins the ultrasound had revealed. He had assumed she'd terminated the pregnancy, or perhaps given the children up for adoption. The possibility that she had kept them, raised them, had never seriously entered his calculations. His eyes darted frantically around the room, landing on the front table where 2 teenagers sat watching Sarah with unmistakable pride. A girl with dark hair and a determined chin, his chin unmistakably the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. And beside her, a boy with piercing blue eyes that were exact replicas of his own. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His children. These poised, well-dressed teenagers were his flesh and blood. Children he had rejected before they were even born. Children who had grown up without him, who now sat in the front row of a gala honoring their mother as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America. "Our proprietary extraction process has revolutionized how precious metals are recovered from electronic waste," Sarah continued, completely unaware of Richard's revelation. "Ecotech has recently surpassed $2.8 billion in market valuation, and today I'm pleased to announce that we've just secured a $1.2 billion contract with the federal government to implement our renewable energy technology in all federal buildings over the next 5 years." The audience erupted in applause. Richard remained frozen, his world collapsing for the second time. First when he nearly lost the family company during the financial crisis, and now realizing what he had carelessly thrown away 15 years ago. The woman he had deemed not enough had built an empire that dwarfed Blackwood Enterprises at its peak. The children he had rejected as an unbearable burden appeared more poised and successful at 15 than he had been at 30. Sarah continued detailing Ecotech's technological innovations and global expansion plans. Her expertise was evident, her vision compelling. This was a woman at the pinnacle of her power, respected by everyone in the room. Then, mid-sentence about sustainable innovation, her eyes swept across the audience and briefly locked with Richard's. For a microsecond there was a flash of recognition, followed by something Richard couldn't interpret. Not hatred, not fear, not even surprise. Something worse, complete indifference. Without missing a beat in her presentation, Sarah looked away and continued speaking as though he didn't exist. Richard, however, felt suddenly exposed, as if every person in the ballroom could see through him to the callous decisions of his past. When the speech concluded, thunderous applause filled the room. Richard watched, paralyzed, as politicians, CEOs, and investors flocked around Sarah. She navigated the crowd with graceful ease, introducing Emma and Ethan to important figures. The teenagers were articulate and confident, clearly comfortable in this world of power and privilege that should have been their birthright through him. Richard stood on unsteady legs and attempted to make his way toward Sarah. He needed to speak with her, to explain what? That he had been wrong? That he regretted his actions? Lies. He had never thought about her until this moment, until seeing what he had lost. As he pushed through the crowded ballroom, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal stepped into his path, recorder extended. "Mr. Blackwood, is it true that Blackwood Enterprises is considering bankruptcy protection following the collapse of the Hudson Yards redevelopment?" Richard attempted to brush past the journalist. No comment. But the damage was done. Nearby attendees had heard the question, and whispers began spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Richard saw the exact moment when the information reached Sarah. She showed no surprise, merely a slight nod of acknowledgement, as if confirming something she had already known. After several agonizing minutes of trying to navigate through the crowd, Richard finally positioned himself in Sarah's path as she moved between conversation groups. "Sarah," he managed, his voice betraying his nervousness. I didn't expect to see you here." She regarded him with calm, assessing eyes. There was no anger visible, only a kind of clinical curiosity. "Richard," she replied with the same cordial tone she might offer any stranger at such an event. "What a surprise! You're—" he stammered, unable to formulate coherent thoughts faced with this version of Sarah he had never imagined possible. "Thank you," she responded simply, and then, as if remembering her social obligations, added, "These are my children, Emma and Ethan." The teenagers looked at Richard without any recognition, with only the polite interest they might show toward any of the many executives their mother knew. "Your children," Richard repeated, the word feeling strange in his mouth. They look remarkable?" Sarah supplied. "Yes, they are. Emma has just developed a bioremediation process that's being evaluated by MIT, and Ethan created a tracking algorithm that will revolutionize our supply chain." Richard stared at the young people, trying to process that they were his children, his blood, his legacy, a legacy he had rejected before it even existed. "I didn't know," he began, but Sarah interrupted him gently. "You didn't need to know," she said without malice. "We've done very well without you." The governor of Washington approached then, his expression eager. "Sarah, we need to discuss that research center proposal for Seattle. The state wants to be part of this initiative." Sarah smiled warmly at the governor. "I'd be delighted to discuss it. Richard, if you'll excuse us." And just like that, she turned away with her children and the governor, leaving Richard standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, invisible and irrelevant to the life he had discarded. As he watched them walk away, Richard realized with crushing clarity that there was no place for him in their world. The woman he had once deemed unworthy had created something far greater than he could have imagined. The children he had rejected had grown to be more talented, more balanced, and more accomplished than he had ever been. The remaining hours of the gala passed in a blur of humiliation for Richard. Potential investors, having heard rumors of Blackwood Enterprises' financial troubles, politely avoided his table. Meanwhile, Sarah remained the center of attention, seamlessly moving between conversations with tech innovators, politicians, and financial leaders, all of whom treated her with unmistakable respect. When the event finally ended, Richard returned to his hotel room alone. The contrast between his solitary existence and the vibrant family unit he had glimpsed painfully apparent. He poured himself a scotch from the minibar and stood at the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline, wondering how different his life might have been if he had made different choices 15 years ago. While Sarah remained oblivious to his silent reckoning, the sequence of events set in motion by their brief encounter would soon force a final confrontation, not in the polished corridors of a luxury hotel, but on the tarmac of a private airport, under the weight of 15 years of unspoken truths. The morning after the gala dawned bright and clear over Seattle, but Richard Blackwood barely noticed as he stared at the front page of the Seattle Times. There he was, captured in a moment of devastation, his face ashen, eyes hollow with shock as he watched Sarah and her children talking with the governor. The headline read, "Two Paths, Ecotech Soars While Blackwood Enterprises Falters." A smaller caption beneath the photo noted, "Sources suggest personal connection between rival CEOs." Richard tossed the newspaper aside, his hand reaching for his phone, which had been buzzing incessantly since dawn. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages. His PR team was in full crisis mode. Before he could respond to any of them, a new notification appeared, an alert from Bloomberg Business. His stomach clenched as he opened the article. Breaking: Blackwood Enterprises CEO abandoned pregnant Ecotech founder 15 years ago. The young reporter from the gala, Jessica Chen, had connected the dots with remarkable efficiency. Her detailed article laid out the timeline with devastating precision. Sarah's sudden departure from Chicago in 2008, her arrival in Portland with newborn twins, the parallel rise of Ecotech, and decline of Blackwood Enterprises. Most damning were quotes from former Blackwood employees who remembered Sarah as the waitress Richard dated before his first marriage. Richard's phone rang, his current CFO, panic evident in his voice. "The stock is in free fall, Richard. Down 17% in the first 30 minutes of trading. Investors are canceling meetings. What the hell is happening?" Before Richard could formulate a response, his personal line beeped with another call, his third wife, Catherine, calling from their Chicago apartment. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble. "Did you abandon a pregnant woman who then became a billionaire? Do you have any idea how this makes me look? My friends are texting me, Richard." The morning spiraled further as Richard attempted damage control. He instructed his PR team to prepare a statement emphasizing that personal matters from 15 years ago have no bearing on current business operations. Even as he said it, he knew it was useless. In the court of public opinion, he had already been tried and convicted. Desperate to speak with Sarah, Richard called Ecotech's corporate headquarters, only to be stonewalled by efficient assistants. He sent emails that went unanswered. Finally, he resorted to having his driver take him to the Grand Hyatt, where he attempted to intercept Sarah in the lobby. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," the concierge informed him with professional courtesy that couldn't quite mask his disapproval. "Ms. Hamilton and her party checked out an hour ago." Back in his hotel room, Richard finally received a response, not from Sarah, but from a Seattle law firm representing Ecotech Solutions. "Ms. Hamilton does not wish any contact with you. Any further attempts at communication will be considered harassment and addressed accordingly." The dismissive brevity of the message stung worse than a direct rejection. He had been categorized as a nuisance not even worth Sarah's personal attention. Determined not to give up, Richard leveraged his few remaining connections to discover when and how Sarah planned to leave Seattle. A former business associate who worked in private aviation reluctantly revealed that the Hamilton party was scheduled to depart from King County International Airport's private terminal at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Richard arrived at the terminal 30 minutes early, pacing the exclusive lounge while ignoring the curious glances from staff who had clearly seen the morning news. When Sarah's party finally arrived, he positioned himself where they would have to pass him to reach the tarmac. Sarah stopped abruptly when she saw him, instinctively moving to place herself between Richard and the twins. Emma and Ethan regarded him with wary curiosity, clearly recognizing him from the gala but unaware of his significance to their existence. "Please, Sarah, we need to talk," Richard said, his voice lower and more desperate than he intended. "They're my children too." Sarah remained composed, her expression calm but resolute. "No, Richard. Biologically, yes, you contributed. But being a father is much more than DNA. It's being present. It's sacrificing. It's putting someone above yourself, things you demonstrated you were incapable of doing." "I was young. I was scared," Richard attempted, aware of how hollow the excuse sounded. I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake is forgetting a birthday," Sarah replied, her voice finally revealing a hint of emotion. "What you did was a calculated choice. You told me exactly what you thought, that I wasn't enough, that I would be a burden. Well, you were wrong in every possible way." Emma and Ethan observed the exchange with growing comprehension, their intelligent eyes moving between their mother and this stranger who seemed to know her. "Don't you want to know your father?" Richard asked them directly, ignoring Sarah's warning look. Ethan responded first, his maturity startling. "We know our father. Mike, Mom's mentor who taught us to fish and helped with science projects, and Uncle James who took us camping every summer, and Dr. Rodriguez who guided my first programming projects." Emma nodded in agreement. "We've had many positive male role models in our lives, Mr. Blackwood. What we lacked in DNA we gained in genuine love." Richard stood speechless, suddenly realizing he wasn't facing ordinary teenagers but young adults who had been raised to be thoughtful, compassionate, and strong, qualities he himself had never prioritized. "We're not here to punish you," Sarah said softly. "We're not here for revenge. The truth is, we moved on a long time ago. We built a life that's fulfilling and meaningful, and you simply aren't part of it." "But I could help," Richard insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Financially, with connections." Sarah smiled, almost with pity. "Our company is worth more than yours ever was at its peak, Richard. My children have trust funds that will cover any university they choose. Our connections include senators, governors, and CEOs of the country's largest companies. What exactly do you think you could offer that we don't already have?" The truth hit Richard like a physical blow. There was no place for him in this family, no need for him. The woman he had deemed not enough had built an empire that completely eclipsed his accomplishments. The children he had rejected had grown to be more talented, more balanced, and more successful than he had ever been. "I'm proud of what we've built," Sarah continued, "not despite your abandonment, but partly because of it. Your rejection showed me I needed to be strong enough for three, and I discovered I was much stronger than I ever imagined." A staff member approached, informing them their jet was ready for boarding. Sarah nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Richard. "Goodbye, Richard. I wish you well, I truly do. But our chapter ended 15 years ago." As Sarah and the twins walked across the tarmac to their waiting jet, Richard remained rooted in place, a solitary figure against the Seattle skyline. He watched the aircraft taxi and take off, carrying away not just the family that could have been his, but also the last chance at redemption he hadn't known he needed. Back in Chicago 3 days later, Richard faced the consequences of his past and present choices. Blackwood Enterprises officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. His third wife moved out of their penthouse, her divorce attorney citing public humiliation among the grounds for separation. The social circle that had once revolved around his wealth and power quickly dissolved. Sitting in his half-empty apartment, most of the furniture claimed by Catherine, Richard received a courier delivery. Inside was a legal notification. Sarah Hamilton was petitioning for him to formally relinquish any parental rights to Emma and Ethan Blackwood Hamilton, rights he had never legally claimed but could theoretically exercise. Accompanying the legal documents was a handwritten note. "Richard, I don't do this out of vengeance, but to close this chapter definitively. The twins will turn 16 soon and should be able to move forward with their lives without shadows from the past. By signing these papers, you will finally do something positive for them. Give them the freedom they deserve. Sarah." With trembling hands, Richard signed the documents. It was his final act as a biological father, acknowledging that he had never, in fact, been a father at all. Meanwhile, in Portland, Sarah and the twins enjoyed dinner on the veranda of their oceanfront home. Emma enthusiastically discussed her plans for an advanced study semester in Tokyo, while Ethan demonstrated the prototype of his new sustainability app on his tablet. "Are you okay, Mom?" Emma asked, noticing Sarah's momentary distraction as she gazed out at the Pacific. After everything in Seattle with him, Sarah turned back to her children with a genuine smile. More than okay. I realized something important seeing Richard again. I've been carrying a small part of that rejection with me all these years, not consciously, but it was there. Now it's truly gone. He seemed sad, Ethan observed thoughtfully, like someone who realizes too late what they lost. That's the natural consequence of his choices, Sarah replied, just as this life is the consequence of ours. When Emma asked more directly about the man they had met in Seattle, Sarah answered with honesty, "He is part of your history, but he doesn't define who you are. His choices were his own. Our choices, to persist, to build something meaningful, to choose strength over bitterness, those define us." As the sun set over the Pacific horizon, illuminating three silhouettes united by love and determination, Richard Blackwood remained alone in Chicago, contemplating the empire he had lost and the family he would never know, victim not of Sarah's revenge, but of his own choices and the poetic justice of a life well lived. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.